Mad Max Fury Road has three principal characters: Imperator Furiosa, Immortan Joe, Max Rockatansky. Protagonist, antagonist, deuteragonist. Each character is introduced from behind, as a body first and then later as a person. We meet Max at a remove, practically a silhouette. Wrapped in cloth and buried in wild hair, it takes several moments before we glimpse human skin. Almost immediately, he's disappearing into his V8 Interceptor, and it's not until his pursuers roll his car that we get a shot of his face, covered in sand and matted beard. Max is a person who has abandoned all markers of his humanity to live alone in the desert. His obscured face makes it easier to relate to him as a feral animal than as a man, and that's the life he's chosen. Living like an animal insulates him from danger and buries his guilt and trauma. Throughout the first chunk of the film, Max's face remains obscured, first by the beard, then by a gag, then by a muzzle. We only get one unobstructed shot of his face, and it's framed by the bars of a cage. The protections he built around himself, the war boys have stripped him of and replaced with chains. Humanity is no longer something forsaken, it's something denied. It's not until 45 minutes into the movie, having escaped Joe and formed a tenuous alliance with Furiosa and the wives, that he starts to look to the audience like a recognizable human. We meet Furiosa in the opposite fashion. Where Max was a wide shot of a silhouette that is all cloth and hair, Furiosa is an extreme close-up of brightly lit human skin. She carries Joe's brand and has her hair cut short, which implies everything we saw Max go through she has gone through as well. They're both prisoners.
I was taken as a child. Stolen.
Where Max is invisible inside his car, we follow Furiosa into the war rig. Max is like a hermit crab receding into its shell only to have it pried off, where Furiosa has complete mastery of her vehicle. It even has her missing arm drawn on the driver's side door as though the war rig were an extension of her body. Clear windows, her face unobstructed, the grease paint on her forehead making her eyes the windows to the soul pop, making her expression more readable. Everything Max takes the first act to become, she is from her first scene. The time between her introduction and getting a good look at her face is just over 2 minutes. Joe's introduction is the sickened version of the others, closer and fleshier than Furiosa's, yet more alien than Max's. Where Furiosa's skin humanizes her, Joe's tumorous body does the reverse. Where Max has his layers of protection stripped from him, Joe is kitted up with armor and finery. Where Max struggles to make his face visible, and Furiosa's expressions are accentuated, the distance between Joe's introduction and seeing his face uncovered is the entire movie. We only see Joe unmasked when half his face has been torn off, and 3 minutes later, the credits are rolling. What makes these characters accessible has been distorted to make Joe a grotesque, and I don't have room to get into the troubling ways Fury Road uses atypical bodies as a shorthand for inhumanity, so I've written a small additional essay because of course I have, link in the down there part or at the end. So here we have it, from the opening shots. Protagonist, antagonist, deuteragonist, human, inhuman, half-human. The things I'm describing are filmic techniques for creating or denying audience empathy. Humans relate to other humans, and filmmakers employ dozens of tricks to portray inhumans as human, and thereby relatable, and portray humans as inhuman to make them otherwise. By this rubric, empathy with Max is built, empathy with Joe is denied, and empathy with Furiosa is simply expected. The female action star being the one for whom empathy is most freely given, it's by no means unprecedented, but it's not the norm. In the tradition of blow shit up movies, the relatable action heroine is often approximated, approached asymptotically, but rarely depicted. Some don't seem to believe she exists, yet here she is. Furiosa is our white whale. If in a rom-com, the thing what solves your problem is love, in an action movie, the thing what solves your problem is violence. Something is wrong with the world, and the plot is structured around amassing the strength, tactics, or allies necessary to smash your problem until it goes away.
Oh, bollocks.
That's how things get fixed. And the idea of punching the world back into shape is deeply tied up in our notions of manliness. There are dozens, if not hundreds, of archetypal action protagonists, from the everyman against the world, to the hulking brute, to the dapper G-man, to the stoic killing machine. And while occasionally cast with women, they are all by default men. There's maybe no other genre more deeply associated with masculinity. The long-standing assumption is that women complicate violent movies the way we used to say they complicate sea voyages.
I think women and seamen don't mix.
We know what you think.
The movies are manly, the audience is male, and a male audience will not identify with a female character as a matter of course. This assumption goes into the writing, the casting, the filming, the editing, and the marketing. Demographics do bear out that violent movie audiences are primarily male, but this assumption existed before we tracked demographics. So then, if we've been making the movies for men and marketing them to men, should we really be surprised if it's mostly men who end up seeing them? For a variety of reasons, action filmmakers can't just make movies without women in them. A, there are still at least a few women in the audience, and their money spends as well as a man's, so best not to completely alienate them. B, they'd rather not get yelled at too much by feminists. C, sleeping with beautiful women is part of the power fantasy a lot of male action heroes are supposed to cater to. And D, absent any women, the fixation with the male physique might read as just a wee bit gay. And we can't have that, apparently. So if women in action movies are unavoidable, perhaps the audience's sympathies, if not freely given, can be earned. For this purpose, action filmmakers have invented a handful of female archetypes. Between these 6 women, we can chart the cinematic language of feminine violence, as it is most commonly codified. I'll stress that they are not the sum total of womanly presence in violent movies, but if you're a fan of violent film, you've probably been in a room with them dozens of times, and never been formally introduced. Each has something to teach us about how men are expected to relate to a woman in a violent context. So let us discuss each in her own turn, and with each, how Fury Road's avoidance, subversion, or rejection of these expectations are key to what the film is about. Let's get y'all acquainted.